Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée. Bruxelles, je t'aime. Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, my love, our weekly chat show on the news bubbling in the de facto EU capital, Brussels. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up this week, the US president has sparked a tornado of anxiety across the continent, all due to his favourite word, tariff. European Commission officials are working around the clock to try to soften the blow, prepare for measures that could hit Europe's industry hard. We take a closer look at the health of the European economy this quarter and break down the anemic growth projections from the European Central Bank. And Poland swings to the right again. In presidential elections, closely watched here in Brussels, polls opted for the conservative EU sceptic Karol Nawrocki, rejecting pro-Brussels Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski. Although tight, the result is a blow to Donald Tusk's governing civic platform and could be a litmus test for the general parliamentary elections due in 2027. A warm welcome to our guests this weekend. Mika Aaltola, a Finnish member of the European Parliament with the centre-right EPP. Welcome.
My pleasure.
Dorota Babalek, EU correspondent for the Polish broadcaster TVP.
Hello.
And Ian Lesser, Vice President of the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much for being with us. Great to have you. But as always, before we get your thoughts, let's just hear more about the roller coaster ride facing EU officials as they try to navigate Trump's tariff tornado. Our trade correspondent Peggy Corlin has more.
After several weeks of fruitless exchanges between the US and the EU administrations, negotiations seem to have started, marked by ups and downs and driven by threats from US President Donald Trump. The EU currently faces tariffs on its steel, aluminium, cars and a 10% duty on all its imports. On Wednesday, the EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič has met his US counterparts Jamieson Greer. But building a relationship of trust is proving difficult given the unilateral nature of US demands and the constant threat by US President Donald Trump to impose new tariffs on EU imports. Last week, for instance, he has announced 50% tariffs on EU steel and aluminium, and 2 weeks ago, he has threatened to impose 50% tariffs on all EU imports.
Peggy Corlin reporting there. So it's pretty confusing, pretty fast-moving situation. What is the mood inside the European Parliament on this? Is it cautious optimism or total mistrust?
Well, we have to show some backbone in this game. Trump is, of course, playing a game of chicken and wants to drag Europe all the way to the brink of abyss. And that's his game. And so we shouldn't get too frustrated. We shouldn't get too fearful. We are extremely important for US still, economically speaking. Transatlantic relationship is economic boost for US. So it would be silly if Trump gambles this wrongly. So show some backbone, but of course be prepared to talk about big numbers. Trump he's a transactionalist, he loves big numbers. But the problem is that we are institutional and institutionalists, and so we are a little bit, we are not so fast moving.
We're super technocrats. Well, the EU commissioners are huge technocrats. Perhaps they need to be a little bit more endearing for Trump perhaps to like more.
Possibly. I mean, this is, part of the problem is his approach on tariffs, but part of it is just this dissonance between Washington, especially these days, and the European Union. I mean, it is, as you say, the European Union just looks to the Trump administration like a slow-moving regulator, a bureaucratic organization, multilateral, all the things they don't really like, to be honest. So part of this is about tariff policy. Part of it is about style. But there's also a NATO summit coming up, and nobody really wants to blow up over trade as we get towards that at the end of June.
Indeed. President Trump is coming to town in a couple of weeks, indeed, for that summit. Hopefully. Well, actually in The Hague.
Hopefully.
It's not in Brussels, of course, in The Hague. We'll be covering it here closely on Euronews. What is your take? I mean, interesting what you say, because we're always thinking of this motto here, Brussels regulates, the US innovates and China replicates. And this is really how the administration is looking at the EU. From your perspective, I guess you've been reporting on this, trying to explain to your viewers back in Poland what is at stake here and what's going on. How do you feel the European Commission has been handling the situation, Dorota?
I think they are doing quite well. And the fact that Trump is trying to put more pressure, it means that our negotiators, European negotiators, are doing a good job. And that's why he is frustrated and he's trying to speed up and have some positive effects. But, it's really difficult for Europe to negotiate a deal with Trump because they do not negotiate for one country, but for the 27. Yeah. And that's why it looks like it does. And I'm actually really happy and maybe even a little bit surprised that this unity is still on, that after a few months of negotiations, Europe is still speaking with one voice. Because that was the worry at the beginning, that maybe Italy will decide to do a deal on its own, maybe Hungary, maybe other countries which have good relations with Trump. But we are still the 27, and the proof that the negotiators are working well is that the Trump is becoming frustrated and is trying to threaten.
Yeah, it's basically a lose-lose situation for all of the West. The Trump is kind of instigating these problems. But the key problem has been that we don't know to whom we should negotiate with. So the commissioner goes and meets up with the US counterparties and has hours-long talks, and at the end, the result is that they cannot decide because Trump is the ultimate decider. Indeed. And we don't know what is the inner circle. It's not his ministers, it's something else. And kind of getting access to that inner circle, to people who actually count in Washington, that's the difficulty. And
I've seen a lot of members of the European Parliament travelling there in the last few weeks, and you're wondering, is it really worth their trip? Or is it just an expensive day out in DC?
It is getting expensive, and it may get more expensive with the tariffs too. But I mean, but part of the issue also is that that very simply the legal challenges that are on, off. It's a moving target for negotiators. It makes it very, very difficult. And who knows what the effect is on Trump's own calculus. It's very hard to know what he really wants at the end of the day from all of this. What does he consider a win?
Well, that's an interesting question that we actually put to one gentleman who's based over in DC. He's a former US diplomat, and now he's set up his own consulting group called the Global Situation Room. And we asked him what tips he could give the Europeans when handling Donald Trump, when negotiating with him. Take a listen.
This is ultimately like, how do you deal with a toddler? A toddler is constantly going to come back and say, I want more, I want more, I want this new toy. Well, if I were advising European leaders, I would say have a bunch of small, shiny objects lined up. And every time Trump comes and says, well, I want something else, you dole out that next shiny object to him. And ultimately, he is a showman. He's trying to dominate the headlines. He's trying to project power. But what lies underneath doesn't actually have to amount to a whole hill of beans.
That's Brett Brune there, DC based, expressing the fact that President Trump has his eye on the prize here and doesn't really care about the substance. And Mick, I saw you speaking in the European Parliament recently on this topic, and you said, quote, honey talking does not work with President Trump. What about the Polish? Are they concerned about this situation, how it could impact their industry?
They are concerned, but, the good relations with the US is such a big priority for Poland, especially now when we have war at our borders, that no one dares to express these concerns out loud. And look at the Polish presidency. I think they keep the tone really quiet every time.
Sometimes you forget it's the Polish presidency.
And there are talks, but the public comments after these talks are avoided.
And do you have some tips on how to negotiate with Donald Trump? Like we heard there from Brett, he has some advice there.
I think, a lot of the traditional approaches simply just won't work because I think you have to sort of get into the mindset of the president. And traditionally, the president's mindset does kind of filter through the whole administration in the United States, for better or worse. And so, I do think he sees the world not just through individual countries, but individual leaders, personalities. And of course, when it comes to trade policy, this doesn't work very well on the European side because it is, above all, a European EU competence. And I think they're very uncomfortable with that. I think part of it may even help if we get to higher defense spending numbers out of the NATO summit, which is perhaps above all what he's looking for as a win, that it will somehow, strangely, affect his view about tariff policy as well. It could be.
Well, Germany is investing so much money into defense and infrastructure. European Union is doing the same. So there's quite a lot for American companies that they can gain if they have an access.
And there was a big meeting in Brussels this week as well, NATO, about that 5% target, pushing member states. And actually Friedrich Merz as well was this week in DC speaking to Donald Trump. He called up Donald Trump the minute he was elected and said, please, we do not want this trade war with Germany and European allies, telling him to back off there.
Well,
it's just not worth it.
Yeah, but, well, it shouldn't be worth it. And let's see how it turns out. It might be that after all of the drama, it's going to be all clear sign towards the end of July. But there's a silver lining when it comes to European Union because it gets money from tariffs. So it might be part of a kind of something we get out when the tariffs most likely will go now up.
It's an interesting line that I haven't heard from anyone because I've been trying to find some tariff supporters here and I haven't managed yet.
And we should have, like, make it clear to Trump that actually his way of dealing with the problem might actually benefit us as well. So if he hikes the tariffs, his object of hate, European Union, will actually be strong at the end.
Because originally people were investing in American companies, hedging their bets there, but now they think, yeah.
Sure, and also, I mean, a place where the United States has a huge stake, but Europe does too, is the whole question of tariffs in relation to China. And I mean, that's really, in some sense, the big game. And it will affect both sides of the Atlantic, what happens with that. And we'll see. And it's very dangerous, of course. But I think these things relate to one another because if you have this growing competition, it's a different topic, but this heavier and heavier strategic competition with China and this economic warfare going on at the same time, the United States could wind up confronting China without allies. Because they've been alienated for other reasons. That's not in our interest. And I think there are probably those in the administration that would accept that as well. But
and I think another advantage of this situation is that we are diversifying the markets. And that's what the Commission is doing really, really well since a few months now, making the meetings, preparing the ground for the new free trade agreements and all sort of the trade agreements. And even in the EU countries, we can see, for example, Canada is now talking with Poland to maybe move their production because the cost of the production are still much lower in the Eastern Europe, in the Central and Eastern Europe. So maybe the effect of the tariff war of Trump will be actually the opposite. He will not get the European companies or the Canadian companies relocating to the US, but they will relocate to Poland or to Czech Republic or to Ukraine, which will become a member state very soon.
Yes.
Very soon. You're very optimistic there, Dorota. Let's just bring in another voice there from Washington, D.C. He's actually a Brussels-based corporate lobbyist, Conor Allen, and he's over there for a couple of weeks checking in with various businesses there to see how these tariffs are impacting them. Let's take a listen now to his thoughts on the tariff dispute.
For years and years and years, we pursued what was known as the Brussels effect, and we used regulation and standards, exported that around the world, and then expected everybody to accept the fact that we were just creating little advantages for ourselves for the entire time. And now a US president has turned around and said, well, actually, we're not going to accept this anymore. However, if you look at his arguments, there is a glint of truth to them, and there is an underlying logic that's very hard to dispute. I hope that hearing that might trigger some debates and trigger some responses. And then we can look at how we conduct ourselves in the world market and perhaps be a bit more free, a bit more open, and be a bit more capitalistic in nature.
So Conor Allen there throwing another opinion into the mix and trying to call for a debate, which we can have right now, on his idea there that, the Brussels effect, we maybe went too far on this, we over-regulated. There was that Finnish lady, Anna Bradford, who wrote a book on this, saying that,
Yeah, that is true.
We were setting the standards, which was quite admirable.
The paradigm was from 1990s. It was first a normative power Europe. Everybody is following us. Then we overstretched when it came to kind of a regulatory tools, and of course others are noticing that, and they have the regulatory powers as well. Tariffs, for example, in case of US. So kind of a class of frameworks, class of paradigms is happening And what ends up happening, of course, is that it's not resolved. It's just put a little bit forward. So we end up having kind of a hybrid solution, a temporary one, a fix. With Trump, you always have those fixes. But let's talk about big numbers to him. LNG, blowed up those numbers, and he likes that. So at the end, he wants to have a deal that he can sell to his base. So that's the name of the game.
Because the tariffs are inflationary.
And we have midterm elections coming up in less than 2 years. And if the balance were to shift on Capitol Hill, his scope, his ability to do some of these things would be really constrained. Wouldn't change his views. That's coming up very fast. And if prices go up in the United States, if inflation is raging or whatever it might be, have a financial crisis, many of these things are possible, that's going to put him under much more pressure. So, there are so many variables here. But, we all face these structural problems. I mean, Europe has its competitiveness debate that's been going on for a long time. Trump has just kind of given history a shove with all of this tariff policy.
Well, should we be more capitalistic? Just to quote what Conor Allen is suggesting there, more free?
I think Europe should just change its attitude to the United States, because I'm sorry, but it's not the same, and it's already the second term of Donald Trump, and I think 8 years ago we missed the moment for change, and maybe we should start to treat the United States as an adversary. And not think that it's a fool who will soon calm down and we will just continue to do business as usual. I'm sorry, but business as usual never works. It didn't work with Russia,
Ian, would you
and probably it will not work with the States.
Well, look, I mean, I know a lot of people would say, just as you've said, I hope we don't go in that direction. I think it would be a mistake for Europe to mirror.
It will be good
Trump's
for Europe to become more independent.
I mean, strategic autonomy makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But I don't think we should be doing it in Europe because the United States has become an adversary. I mean, I have to hope, I'm an American, I have to hope that what we're seeing is more episodic than structural. But there are some structural things. Let's face it, just as there are in Europe. And you need to be prepared for that. I mean, even if you had a Democrat in office, there would be the same anxieties about this deepening competition with China and the effect of that on America's commitment to Europe. I mean, that's a reality.
Well, it was always America first, the Democrats too.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing about this administration. People feared that it would be isolationist. It's not isolationist. It's hyper-unilateralist. It's also not great. But that's sort of what Europe is. So I think Europe should be doing these things for its own reasons, but I don't think to go in the direction of considering the United States an adversary and assuming that what we're seeing is permanent. I hope you're not right about that. I mean, I don't think we should make it a self-fulfilling prophecy either. There are lots of Americans who have a big stake in what happens here. Transatlantic relationship economically is still the biggest in the world. That's a structural thing. There are all of the different connections between cities and states and businesses and civil societies. It's not going away.
I think it is very important that it's more even, the transatlantic relationship, when it comes to kind of a European geostrategic position. So we have to grow up. Unfortunately, Americans are growing. They're becoming immature in a certain sense, and it's difficult to kind of manage this. But we have to always remember that US is our friend, and some cases you have to give also negative feedback to your friend. And that backbone, that is something that we should find, because it also helps on the long run, US. So they don't take us for granted as they have done. So kind of having a more even relationship, it's difficult, yes. But at the end, we will have to find it, because US is, of course, still an ally that cannot be, we cannot compensate for that lack. We can try on the long run to have a bigger stick. So we have also a say that we are not only morally preaching to the rest of the world, which is very annoying from an American perspective. But
meanwhile, our economy, of course, is struggling. We're sort of coming back to growth after a really tricky 2024. You mentioned already the competitiveness issues. We saw at the OECD this week, that gathering in Paris as well, reports coming out that the tariffs will cause the global economy to slow and growth now at its weakest pace since the COVID-19 pandemic. That's really what's at stake here, Dorota, which is very concerning.
Yeah, but hopefully in the short term. You see, I stay positive. I think, when it comes to economy, Europe knows how to do the business and how to look after our pockets and our wallets. It still doesn't know how to look after our security and our, from the physical and mental way, which means that this war against democracy and fake news and disinformation, this is where Europe is not doing well. But when it comes to protect our wallets, it's always doing well. The problem is that, even if we have the wallets full of money, but we are no more independent and we are aggressed physically or mentally, we will not spend this money well.
And on that point of money, we saw this week Bulgaria, the poorest country in the EU, getting the green light to join the Eurozone as of next year.
Well, that's quite something. It's very important that the currency becomes more stable the more countries join it. Of course, it has some structural issues. Some of the smaller economies, like the Finnish economy, I come from Helsinki, so it's difficult to have a currency that is highly valued compared to your productivity numbers that have been declining over the years. So that creates some tensions and strain inside the euro area. But Finns are happy with the euro.
And you're hoping the Swedes will join the Eurozone, but for now, they're sitting on that.
No, they are sitting on the fence and they're benefiting.
And Poland too. I mean, you're ready to join, but you don't want to.
Not after the presidential elections, which we will speak later on. I think the result made it that we will wait even longer than we expected.
You will wait. Well, if you are curious on the Polish presidential elections that took place last weekend, do stay with us here on Euronews, because on that point we can bring this conversation about EU-US ties to a close. And in a minute we'll be back to discuss the recent presidential elections in Poland that could change the country's relationship with Brussels, because we saw a candidate come out front there who's been rather Eurosceptic in his campaigns. Stay with us here on Euronews for more analysis and debate coming up very shortly. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. If you've just joined us, you're watching our weekly chat show that dives into the A to Z of European politics with expertise, analysis and debate. Well, this week, the big story was the Polish election outcome. The winner was Karol Nawrocki. He got 50.89% of the votes. And the loser was the mayor of Warsaw. That's Rafał Trzaskowski, getting 49.11%. Brussels congratulated the winner, the president-elect, and said they looked forward to good cooperation with Poland. But behind the scenes, there's a little bit of concern that he's deeply Eurosceptic, anti-establishment, and has said he does not want to be dictated by Brussels. So let's turn to Dorota now on what was a very tight race, because Poland is divided.
Yes, Karol Nawrocki won by 370,000 votes only. So it was a really tight win. But he's the winner. The Polish people decided that it's him who should be the president.
So what's he like?
He's not very presidential, but the history shows that Polish people actually, since the last 4 times we voted, 5 times we voted, they always choose the candidate with whom they can go to drink a beer or to go fishing. They want this president to be an ordinary man, because they hope that because of that he will understand their problems. And that was the problem of Rafał Trzaskowski, that actually he appealed to Polish people in the big cities, to the educated part of the society, but he had no support in the villages, in the small towns, where he completely lost. And even the fact that he speaks fluently French there was seen as his disadvantage, as a proof that he is too much intellectual, and that's why he doesn't represent them.
And this movie we've seen before, it's playing out like in practically all EU member states. You mentioned this ordinary man. Let's just take a listen to him and hear the messages he's been using to connect with his voters.
Zabrali pieniądze.
They took the money, set up the institutions of the Polish state against us, lied. And you were there with me the whole time, and we were together for 6 months of this fierce fight for Poland. We managed to unite the entire patriotic camp in Poland, the entire camp of people who want a normal Poland, a Poland without illegal migrants, a safe Poland. We managed to unite all those who want social community security.
Bezpieczeństwa socjalnego, społecznego.
So Karol Nawrocki there, banging a little bit the nationalist drum, but also kudos. I mean, in such a short period of time, he was unknown a couple of months ago, and now he's already been elected as president.
Well, his message reached the voters, so you have to always look, when you lose elections, was it the goodness of your opponent or that you did actually bad in connecting with people? And as you said, it is very important in these very polarized times, if you are running as a liberal candidate, that you reach out and you have a kind of a charming campaign. Romanian presidential elections were the victory for liberals was determined by the ability of the candidate to depolarize and charm people. And it seems now that the nationalistic candidate, from radical right, actually managed to do that better. So you have to look to the mirror, but we have to always think about democratic elections. We have to normalize. Now with high tensions, every election seems to matter. It's the end of the world if somebody wins or loses. We have to normalize. It's democracy. It happens that voters now prefer this candidate, and they balanced power as well, giving power to the opposition.
Ian, your take on the situation?
Well, no, I would agree with this. Look, I mean, clearly there is a kind of insurgent, anti-establishment, angry mood in publics on both sides of the Atlantic, actually. But it doesn't manifest itself in the same way in each case. I mean, we had tests recently in Romania and Canada where it went in a different direction. Partly an anti-Trump effect, maybe in some cases, even if in this case perhaps the Trump effect was working in his favor. Yeah. So we don't. There are so many variables in this. It's hard to know. I think what is clear is that as a sort of political force, this kind of populism, identity politics, nationalism, this is not going away. It's there. It's part of the debate. And yes, as you say, we have to look in the mirror and understand, whatever your political tendency, why is it? Why is it so many young men in particular are reaching for cultural conservatism, for example?
And what does this mean now for Donald Tusk and the Civic Platform? And he's going to hold a vote of confidence as well next week.
A headache, for sure. Donald Tusk already called the vote of confidence, which will happen in Poland next week, and probably he will get the support because he still has the majority in the parliament. But of course, the problem is that this vote of confidence will happen only a few days after the elections, only 3 weeks after the first round of the elections, where every party from his coalition had its own candidate and they were competing against each other. And there were some criticism, like in every campaign. So it's not 100% sure, but at the same time, he has to do it because the opposition leader, Jarosław Kaczyński, is also already calling to create a technical government in Poland with the extreme right, who got a huge support in the first round, and then their voters voted for Nawrocki in the second round.
And it was Jarosław Kaczyński who mentored this president-elect, right? He's been kind of there working behind the scenes, mentoring him. And he was even involved in some scandals as well, but voters obviously don't care.
Well, it is the vulnerabilities and stains in us that make others identify with us. So, with Trump, you had the same effect. And there's clear appeal for these types of candidates on both sides of the Atlantic. So, we are not isolated from US and the political culture there. And of course, we have a very highly toxifying social media where the algorithms propel candidates who have strong emotional views on particular topics, who might have even some, human stains on them.
And just briefly, Ian, how could this impact Brussels, Poland ties?
It's not going to help. On several levels. Poland has become is a critical member of the European Union, as seen from any perspective. I mean, you have a war on your borders. There's a war in Europe.
We are the biggest defense spender.
Well, exactly. You are the biggest
5%,
right? Yeah. Already reaching 5%, and all the rest of it. But also, as you know, it's important that Poland has a strong voice in European affairs. And if you have a sovereigntist EU skeptic president, this is going to vastly complicate the policy in Poland, but also how Poland is seen, in Brussels, including on very practical issues like the distribution of money.
And on that very interesting point on money, we can bring this conversation to a close. Thank you so much to our panellists for being with us. And thank you for watching. See you soon here on Euronews. Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, our weekly talk show here on Euronews that dives into the pros and cons of European politics. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with our panel this weekend, Mika Aitola, Dorota Bavalek and Ian Lesser, we're just taking a look back at the news of the week. And one that turned our heads was this: the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez's proposal to make Catalan, Basque and Galician official EU languages. But it got a thumbs down from the EU Council. Pedro Sánchez faced a serious setback when ambassadors from all across the board refused to expand these 3 languages to the current list of 24. And back in 2023, of course, he had promised the Catalan separatist Junts party that he would get these languages on the official list, of course, in return for propping up his government. So he's really in a bit of a pickle here, Mika. Did you follow this story?
Well, I did. Language question is, of course, enormously political in many countries. In some parts, those issues have been resolved. Like in Finland, we have 2 official languages. Yeah. But luckily, Swedes are inside European Union, so it is one of the official languages as well as Finnish language. But we have, of course, minority languages, Sami language, for example. But it would cost enormously. So being a frugal northern person, I have to say that it doesn't make much sense. It would delay many processes because everything has to be translated to so many languages.
Because now we have 24 languages. Is that enough, Ian?
Well, I'm really the wrong person to ask in a way because, I've been living in Brussels for 14 years, but as an American, I've been a huge beneficiary of the fact that you can live in Brussels, professionally work here, and use English constantly. Honestly, we were chatting about this. I think in 14 years, I've never been in a professional setting here where anything but English was used. And I don't think they were doing it for me, although I appreciate it.
I found out that actually it cost 44 million euro in Brussels to have one of these official languages being used. So this is the cost of the translators and interpreters. So to introduce the 3 regional languages of Spain, it would be a cost of over 120 million euro. And of course, it would cause an enormous domino effect, because in Poland we have also many regional languages.
You're opening a Pandora's box here, right?
Yes.
Pedro Sánchez.
So we just cannot afford that, and maybe also Pedro Sánchez should also learn the lesson from David Cameron and be careful to promise the things to be done on European level.
Just on the cost, I mean, of course, a lot of people are employed by the institutions to work in translation, interpretation. It's not an easy job, and according to the studies of the Commission, it's only €2 per EU citizen per year that it's costing. But indeed, that is another debate. According to a Eurobarometer as well, most Europeans are in favour of supporting languages. We were taking a look. 84% support protecting regional and minority languages. 86% believe everyone should speak at least 2 languages. And 76% say improving language skills should be a policy priority. And then 59% say they can already have a conversation in at least 2 languages. What do you think of that data?
Well, Eurobarometer was great in pointing out that European Union, the trust levels are extremely high.
Great.
Highest in 17 years. So there's demand for European Union. And we, of course, have the slogan that we celebrate our diversity. And from that angle, the more the merrier. But, there has to be some clear-cut criteria. Perhaps if Spain pays for it, then it can be arranged.
That was an argument used apparently during the ministerial meeting about that. I've heard it from the Polish sources. Yeah, some ministers propose you want your languages, you pay the 120 million euro for it.
Because, of course, we have to stay competitive here as well and compete with the Americans and Chinese. If we're spending so much time translating these thick documents, it's tricky.
Well, yeah, maybe. But I mean, I think the interesting thing here is that at a time of greater sort of hot sort of identity politics and nationalism and all of this kind of thing, obviously these questions about the use of language take on a different hue. They're portrayed differently. I mean, look at what it's meant in Spain to be able to put that proposal forward. I mean, that was for many reasons, practical ones, very deep political ones. That's becoming more consequential. So maybe it's a point of some optimism that people do have this trust and they're willing to see more diversity in terms of how it's expressed in society, culture, language, all of those things.
And in the Parliament, you're almost marking 1 year since the elections. Not a lot has been done so far. Do you think that the emphasis on languages and giving everyone the opportunity to speak in their own language is taking time from the debate, and you're not just getting to the point quicker?
Well, we have been, foreign policy and defence has been the main issues, and the language of defence and power is something that we should learn. Instead of bringing in other languages. So we should have this unity approach as well. And now we are trying to find...
So we should speak the language of power. That's what Joseph Borrell used to say all the time.
Yes. So the Commission says that it's a geopolitical commission. It's putting emphasis on deepening integration on defence. Defence was supposed to be the last issue to be settled, and now we are jumping into that. I'm not for kind of spending money on having extra languages.
Dorota, you've been here for 17 years, so you've been here long enough to know that in the past there was actually a multilingualism commissioner.
Yes, it was.
Yes. Back in the days when things were good. Do the institutions now need to be more pragmatic, cut away all those niceties?
I think maybe the voters, next time when there is the European elections, they should think that these politicians they are sending to Brussels are much more effective when they speak at least two or three languages. And I'm really completely in favor of improving the language skills of citizens. So this comes back to the education. I think the biggest problem of Europe nowadays is the education, and that's why the populists are growing so much in support. Because we really need to go back to the grassroots and educate the society, go back to schools and make sure that the new generations are the clever, intelligent people who make the good choices.
Yes, the PISA numbers are going down in multiple countries across Europe. And we should, yes, definitely, the education system, we should invest into that. So the question of kind of playing gimmicks with language politics and bringing the internal politics of Spain into Brussels, I think that's not what we should be doing. I respect Catalans, I respect the minority languages in any part of Europe. I have to say that I am a non-lingual person myself. I speak an encrypted language of Finland, which is not spoken by many. And then English, and I have learned multiple different other languages, but I'm not fluent in any, not even Finnish.
But that's perfection, or imperfection, not perfection. It's all about communicating. Well, on that point, we can bring this conversation to an end. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on multilingualism. Should we spend on this or not? Reach out to us here at Euronews. It's Brussels, my love, at euronews.com. But for now, I'd like to extend my gratitude to our guests this weekend for being with us. And thank you so much as well for watching. See you soon here on Euronews.